think you guys can already tell what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be fun, but my goal for you today is to open everyone's mind about drugs, certain drugs. My personal favorites, weed, Molly, and, cocaine, but not necessarily. I'm not going to talk about that one as much and focus on LSD. 3 drugs that have given me pretty significant influences and experiences that are pretty unforgettable. So just to give you a little timeline of how I became such a druggie. Up until high school, I was actually pretty straight edge, didn't really drink, smoke, tried pot for the first time when I was a sophomore and thought it was okay. It wasn't that great, didn't really get high. Started opening up to pot more, a little more by the end of senior year, and then college, smoked a little more. And then moved on to try a bump of coke in sophomore year of college. Thought that was pretty fun. And then when I was studying abroad, actually tried MDMA in Germany, which was fantastic. It was my very first rave and so much fun. And then recently I experimented with some hallucinogens, specifically LSD with my cousin over there, and was a life-changing experience and a lot of fun. And Jacob was there as well. So, just to start off, I was inspired to talk about drugs, not because I like to do them. In fact, I didn't really think I would talk about drugs for a TED Talk. I was inspired when I was driving home one day. It was over winter break, and I was listening to NPR, and a man by the name of Carl Hart came on the radio. He's authored a book called High Price, A Neuroscientist's Journey of Self-Discovery that challenges everything you know about drugs in society. This man grew up in the toughest neighborhoods of Miami, had, parents that I believe split up. There was drug problems in the family. He dealt drugs himself and actually fathered a kid at age 17, which he didn't find out about until he was in his 30s or 40s. So this guy has kind of seen it all. He's seen addiction and drug abuse, and he actually strives to redefine what addiction is and wants to spread fact about drug use rather than let stigma kind of determine drug policy. So he thinks that addiction, or what we think is addiction, I think is a little wrong. I thought I was addicted to drugs at one point, and some of you can argue that I am. But what he thinks is addiction is you're addicted to something if it's inhibiting your daily responsibilities. If you're doing drugs and you're still going to work, you're picking up your kids from school, you're meeting the responsibilities that as an adult you need to meet, then are you really addicted? I mean, that's a question that one can argue, but personally I think if you're capable of keeping up with the responsibilities that you have to, then I don't see a problem with drug use. He thinks drug problems or social problems are a lot of times blamed by drug use, when in fact drug problems are just a way to cope with social problems. You see someone who's on the street and you're like, wow, that person really messed up their life because they probably did a lot of meth or whatever. But how do you know that's the case? How do you know that they were raised by a single-parent household that, didn't really value education or was abused and then as a result ended up going into meth? You don't know that. I personally was raised in a great household, had very loving parents, cannot complain about my upbringing, and I just so happen to do drugs myself. So I don't think drugs are to blame for a lot of society's problems. Also, in terms of addiction, a lot of geniuses in the past have used drugs and, can attribute them to some of their successes. I mean, Bill Gates, I don't think LSD technically correlated with the creation of Microsoft, but you wouldn't expect the richest man in the world to have experimented with LSD and be so fond of it. Francis Crick also, who was the founder of the double helix, although some people can argue that he stole that. He claims that he actually saw a double helix on one of his acid trips. Sigmund Freud, on the bottom right, was an avid user of cocaine and claimed that coke allowed him to talk about memories that he couldn't, that were kind of trapped in his brain, and he'd be able to talk freely about them as a result of doing cocaine. And then on the bottom left, Charles Sagan, who's an astrophysicist and cosmologist, is a huge pothead, smokes all the time, and wrote a book called Marijuana Reconsidered, but actually authored it under a pen name, and then it was revealed that it was him after he died. Just speaking about the virtues of marijuana and how that's helped him with his studies. So another thing that really, really caught my attention that Carl Hart specifically talked about was drug policy is not really backed by science. It's backed by stigma. So, you get caught with a Schedule I drug, selling a Schedule I drug, let's say like marijuana, and you can go up to prison. I'm not exactly sure what the length of it is, but for a really, really long time. When in fact, let's be real, is alcohol worse than marijuana? I think a lot of people would agree, given the fact that I've never felt threatened by anyone who was stoned, but I have felt threatened by someone who's drunk before. Also, drunk people have killed millions of people through drunk driving, whatever. So as a result, drug policy tends to target people of lower socioeconomic levels. You see people who, get caught with a drug, whatever, and then they're screwed up for life because they have something on their record. It's just kind of, it's like a circular process where you really can't get out of the situation that you were brought into, and then when you bring drugs in the mix, it just screws you over even more, when in fact your initial situation was kind of what caused you to be in the shitter, for lack of better words. In terms of addiction and drugs, Carl Hart mentions that 80 to 90% of people who've tried methamphetamines and crack cocaine are actually not addicted. A lot of there's a huge stigma that if you try a certain drug, you're addicted to it, like coke, meth, whatever. That's not the case at all. He's actually done studies like this with both animals and humans and has proven that drug addicts are actually rational thinkers, and if given the option to do drugs or to be given something of higher value, they'll be given the option, they'll take the thing of higher value. So he did a study where he'd bring actual crack addicts to a lab. He'd give them crack, and all of them would accept to smoke it. And then when he was given the option of crack or $5, most of them actually ended up taking the crack. But if you up the ante a little bit to $20, they actually would end up taking the $20. As things increased in value, they would take the thing of higher value. They were willing to forego the actual drug. And the interesting thing is, the money would not be paid until after the study was done, so it would be about like a week or two. So knowing the fact that the drug addict was willing to wait for the reward later rather than have the immediate benefit of getting high from crack goes to show that addiction isn't not necessarily what we think it is. Okay, so drugs and spirituality. This is kind of an area that I've only recently delved into. I used to not really be very much of a spiritual person, but the last year, I'd say, with experiencing with MDMA and LSD, kind of come to realize that it doesn't hurt to meditate, and spirituality is really important. Actually, MDMA is often referred to as the Buddha drug because when you're rolling on Molly, you release the sense of ego, you are honest, you're intimate with your surroundings, there's a feeling of togetherness, you're communicating freely, and that's very common of meditation and what Buddhists go through when they're meditating. And it's both symptoms, I guess, are very similar. And I was actually trying to read up on Buddhists who were interested in psychedelics and MDMA, and I found some interesting things. This guy by the name of Nicholas Saunders, he contributed for I think it was this institute called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Institute for Psychedelic Studies, and he interviewed 4 different religious leaders, two different types of Buddhists, one I believe it was Hindu and another a rabbi, and these leaders obviously come from religions that no religion really values drug use. They don't, they're not going to outwardly say, yeah, we support drug use. What? Okay, but in general, let's not get a little nitpicky here. But he interviewed he actually took a Benedictine monk to a rave and gave him MDMA, and actually, when he went to this rave, was like, wow, this is meditation when he was rolling on drugs, because he just had this sense of clarity and insight and togetherness with the crowd there, and to the monk, that seemed like meditation to him. So it was really interesting, and I found a really cool quote about, it was actually one of the rabbis said this about MDMA, and he described it as, it's like a climber walking in the mountains who is lost in the fog and unable to see the peak he has set out to climb. All of a sudden, the fog clears and he experiences the reality of the peak and gains a sense of direction. Even though the fog moves in again and it's still a long, hard climb, this glimpse is usually an enormous help and encouragement. So, I'm not trying to say that, if you roll, you're going to have this outrageous revelation and, you're going to be so moved by it, but there are times you do realize little things about yourself and you feel a sense of connectivity with the people that you're doing the drugs with, and that really matters. And sure, it's not life-changing, but it does give you something to look forward to, or it is nice to know that there is an alternative way to experience life, and sure, it's temporary, but it's still great, and I think everyone should at least be open-minded to it. Moving on. Another thing is, illegal drugs can be less harmful than prescription drugs and alcohol, obviously. I read an interesting statistic that adverse drug reactions, so when you're actually prescribed a prescription drug by a doctor, those bad reactions are the 4th leading cause of death in the U.S. behind heart disease, cancer, and stroke. So something that you're actually prescribed to by a doctor can kill you versus, weed, and that's still illegal. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard of actually a death from weed. I don't know if anyone has. Let me know. But yeah, and still legal. Sorry. Also, we all know the effects of alcohol. It can lead to violence, fetal damage, liver and heart disease, fatal or overdose. Prescription drugs obviously have a slew of side effects. My eldest sister, actually, she is developmentally disabled, and I asked my mom this morning, so since I didn't tell her what I was talking about today, I'm like, Mom, I'm giving a presentation. Would you mind telling me, what prescription drugs Yasmin is on? She gave me, 8. And my parents have told me that they've actually felt guilty about giving her so many drugs, but it's kind of, there's no other choice, because otherwise, she'd have these behavioral problems and all these other problems that would prevent her from living normally or more normal. So and I've seen her reactions to these drugs. She's overweight and has to, eats a lot as a result of the side effects. Sometimes there are nights where she just will cry all night for no apparent reason, says she's scared of something. And granted, she has the mentality of a 5-year-old. It's just odd. And you just know that's a result of one of the 8 prescription drugs that my mom's giving her. And it sucks there's no other choice, but that's how we deal with. And I personally am a conspiracy theorist about the pharmaceutical industry. I do believe, first of all, they're for profit, so people staying alive would be preventing a revenue stream from them. The cure for cancer would probably be the death to Eli Lilly. So, I mean, I think these prescription drugs make you health, or they'll cure you for something but give you an ailment for something else, so that pharmaceutical companies can monopolize on you. Oh, and then I just made I got this from The Economist. It ranked drugs in terms of harm for yourself and harm to others. And where the happy faces are, those are Schedule I drugs by the DEA. So the bottom two, it's just interesting that those are Schedule I. So that means they're considered, if a Schedule I drug means that there's a high risk for abuse and they don't see any medical benefit, which is also funny that cannabis would also be would be considered not having medical benefits when medicinal marijuana is legal in about 18 states. So yeah, it's just interesting how drug stigma has really been rooted in the minds of Americans. And then so my own personal experiences. Let's talk about weed first. I've smoked it a lot, and I have to say, I think I self-reflect the most when I smoke. There isn't really any other time where I've been able to so freely admit that I was wrong in a situation. I've actually, after smoking, or let's say after me getting in a tiff with my mom, or just, I don't know, reflecting on a day and thinking, wow, Jenny, that was probably a stupid decision. You were actually in the wrong. Whereas when I was 5 minutes before I was stoned, I was still really pissed and thought that I was in the right. So I think that's actually one of the most beneficial things. And it's almost like a little crucible, but more enjoyable if you think about it. And also, I mean, I've never felt so creative when I was smoking weed. As you guys know, I've sort of gotten into DJing, and I really, really do enjoy it when I'm stoned, because when you smoke, it kind of turns off your inner editor. It just lets you willingly be as creative as possible, brainstorm as much as possible. Whereas I don't know if you guys experienced this, but when you're trying to brainstorm, you think about something and you're that's a whatever idea. I'm not going to explore it any further. To me, weed allows me to explore those ideas even further. And Molly, so that's pretty, I have to say those have been done in a rave setting. And I can't say that I've self-reflected the most on this drug, but I've created really, really special bonds with the people that I've rolled with. Whether you think it's stupid or not, but having a rave family is actually really, really comforting. And it's just, you share something that you can't really explain to other people. And I know right now I'm not doing the best at explaining what my MDMA experiences was like, but with the people that you do it with, they know. So it's just a special bond that you have. And last but not least, LSD. That I never really gave a shit about nature or the world around me until I did LSD. I've never realized how fucking beautiful this world is, and I've actually cried tears of joy about how gorgeous the surrounding was and everything was perfect. And once again, your acid trip's also a little hard to explain to people who've never done acid, but you kind of realize how connected this world is, and how special we are to be on it. And I'm not trying to be religious or anything, but maybe there is something divine out there, because the world is so complicated and yet it's still one. So that's my take on it. Anyways, so that's it for drugs. I hope I've opened your mind up a little bit, and I'd love to open up the floor for any questions.